Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Code and the Coding Coders Who Code It. I'm your host, Drew Bragg, and I'm joined today by Adam Fortuna. Adam, for anyone who's not familiar with you, would you please give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Hey, I'm Adam. I think maybe some Rails and Ruby developers might know me from working at Code School, doing interactive courses. Some people might know me from a financial blog I wrote for a couple of years called Minify. You Minify JavaScript. That was kind of the emphasis of the name. Lately, I've been working on Hardcover, which is a social network for readers to find books and get recommendations from friends.
All right, so the way this is going to work for anyone new to the show is I'm going to ask Adam 3 questions. I'm going to ask him what he's working on, what kind of blockers he has. If he doesn't have a current blocker, he can talk about a recent blocker he had, how he went about solving it. And then we'll wrap up the show by asking Adam what's something cool, new, or interesting that he's recently learned or discovered. Doesn't have to be coding related, but of course it always can be. So without any further ado, Adam, what are you working on?
I just finished a really big migration for Hardcover's code base where we migrated from Next.js to Ruby on Rails. And that ended up taking quite a bit of time. Some of our backend was already in Rails, but our front end was in Next. That migration really took over my life for quite a few months lately.
That's not a quick and easy migration. So in your mind, at least, what would you consider the difference between a migration and a rewrite?
It depends on how much you're able to reuse. All of our front end was in React within Next.js. So we were able to keep that piece and move it over to Rails. So that part was able to be migrated. And the part that had to be rewritten was all of that data access layer. Because previously in Next.js, we were hitting a GraphQL API and getting our data and then sending that to React, or sometimes getting it client side and using that in React. This pretty much changed it all to just using it in Rails, getting it from ActiveRecord in the database, serializing it to JSON, and sending it to React. So yeah, it was a bit of a combination of those two.
And you recently wrote a fairly detailed blog post, or at least a part 1 blog post on doing this. And you go into quite a bit of it. And the one part that stuck out to me a bit was the performance improvement that you guys saw. And I think that's, to a lot of people, probably surprising to hear, hey, we used Ruby on Rails and got better performance. It's not surprising to most Rails devs to hear that, but it could be anyone listening who isn't familiar enough with Rails and may just know it doesn't scale, it's not performant nonsense that people talk about. Can you talk a little bit about the performance improvements that you're seeing and any, say, speculations you have onto what is helping the most with that?
So initially when the project started back in 2021-ish, I really wanted to do something that was really interactive. So that's kind of why React was chosen as the front end. I'm a Rails developer for quite a long time, but I didn't choose Rails for it initially because the server-side rendering side, if you're doing a JavaScript app within Rails, 5 years ago, that had a completely different way to do it. So with Next.js, we were able to render the server-side render all the HTML. So the first load gets all the HTML of the page you need, and then it's hydrated with React. But we weren't able to do that with Rails until recently, where now we were able to do that using a combination of Vite and SSR and inertia to take this big React tree, render it to HTML, and send that as the first load. And so that kind of meant there was parity there between what would be loaded initially from Next and Rails. I wasn't expecting much improvement beyond that. Next actually handles a lot of cases really well, like fonts. It does some really cool things for those where it loads them in really fast ways, and some other just speed improvements for Google page speed. But I was kind of surprised at how well Rails was able to do that. But on top of that, we were seeing startup times for the initial requests that took a little bit longer on serverless functions with Next, even on Vercel or Google Cloud Run. And then when we moved to Rails, even just deploying on DigitalOcean droplets, those time to first byte metrics ended up speeding up significantly. And that ended up being the biggest boost to our Google page speed.
Right. And you said that actually helps a lot with how Google ends up ranking you in their search. So it's an SEO kind of thing. I don't know if you would consider it out of the box, but it almost sounds like it was an accident that those things, that wasn't the target improvement. you were just making the move and then noticed, hey, we're getting these side benefits that we weren't expecting.
Yeah. The baseline was really not dropping our SEO.
But incidentally, you talk a little bit in the blog about that actually being part of the reason why you chose Next in the beginning, because you wanted to React front end for the interactivity, but because React doesn't actually load up a page right off the bat, Google was going to kind of not be able to pick up on a lot of your SEO and whatnot and cause a hit to your page speed. So you choose Next.js for that server rendering component, but then it actually improved even more when you got to Rails.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. What was it like working with Inertia? Because I've heard lots about it. I know its existence. I've heard good things about it, but I haven't played with it myself. So what do you think about Inertia as part of a Rails project?
So I feel like Inertia was the missing piece for me for Rails for a long time. The sanctioned Rails path for generating like JavaScript apps has changed quite a bit over the years. We had like RJS for a while and things like that. And then more recently, it's been like Stimulus, or you just use turbo links and just re-render the entire page or something like that.
Yeah, Hotwire is the new turbo links, or at least. And that's a follow-up question. I want to talk more about Inertia, but then I want to talk a little bit about Hotwire. So yeah, carry on with Inertia.
I'd kind of spent so much time learning React. I hadn't learned the Stimulus, that side of Rails. So when I was thinking about how to use this React app on Rails, there were like three major gems that kept coming up. I think there's like a React on Rails and a React Rails one. And those handle things in different ways. But Inertia ended up being kind of the most lightweight of them all. And it felt the most Railsy of them all. So I think about it like in a controller, you set some instance variables and those get passed to a view usually. With Inertia, you can do that exact same thing, just set some variables in a controller. And you can either call render, I think it's render inertia : and then a string to a part to a template. And that template is a React or a Vue component, or I think even a Svelte component. And it'll take in those instance variables, or you can pass them in as a separate argument on the render, kind of like render JSON, and then you pass in some JSON. That kind of skips all the rest of it. It goes straight from your controller to a React component. There's no other step there. So your component at that point just takes in whatever was passed in from the controller. And then you're just straight in React. There's no like other step.
So one of the lovely things, I think, about working in Rails, and I've worked with split code bases before, a Rails backend with it was actually a Vue.js front end, but same basic concept. But the thing that always gave me a little bit of a headache was the routing. I feel like I would define my routes in Rails and then I would sort of redefine them on the front end. And from what I know of Inertia, it kind of solves that problem for you.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest differentiators between Inertia and the other React on Rails libraries that I was looking at, where those ones you would probably need to use React Router or something like that, and kind of maybe have like a catch-all route in Rails that rendered something, and then it was a lot of different steps. With Inertia, you can kind of bypass that, because the way that it works is like within React or Vue or Svelte, you have a custom Inertia link component, a JavaScript component. And when you use that component to link from one page to another, it doesn't do a full page load. It kind of does something kind of more similar to turbo links, where it hits your controller. So maybe you're linking from books to show a specific book. When you click on that link to go to that specific book, it hits the Rails route for like books show, like it normally would. It renders whatever you would normally render. But depending on if it's a full HTML request or an inertia request, like when you click on a link, it loads kind of a different version of that page where it's just able to download it and then repopulate the page with it. So it doesn't have to do a full HTML reload. It just kind of loads the components and data it needs for the new page that you're loading up and replaces your current state on the page with it.
Okay. That sounds familiar to how things kind of work in Hotwire, which is kind of the turbo links replacement. But based on the fact that you keep referring to turbo links, Is it safe to assume you're not super familiar with Hotwire as how Rails is your, let's do air quotes here, but preferred way of handling the front end now?
Yeah, I've only done like the basic turbo links where you don't even have any real JavaScript. You're just re-rendering the page.
Yeah. Okay. I did want to ask you about why did you choose to stick with React versus Hotwire, if there was a specific reason, like, oh, Hotwire doesn't do this well, but React does, so we just stuck with it. Or, hey, we had React, our front end was already written. It was easier to port that in than learn Hotwire. So we can skip those questions.
That would be a rewrite instead of a migration. Sure.
There you go. There's the difference between the rewrite and the migration. I hesitate to ask this question because it feels very much like the second question, but I swear it's not. What was the most challenging bit about going from Next over to Rails?
The most tedious is probably just rewriting every GraphQL query as ActiveRecord queries and then serializing them to JSON and then sending them over. I think the most difficult part was probably just getting all of the Vite server and inertia and Rails and getting all those to work together in harmony. Once they were all working together, it was great. But there were a lot of parts where I'm like, I'm not setting a specific Vite variable in my Docker config or in my Docker file. I think those DevOps side parts where it's kind of still kind of a new combination of these technologies working together. And so relying on the documentation helped, but there were a couple times when I had to join the Inertia Slack or Discord, and they helped me out with some roadblocks.
That's cool. That was a follow-up question right there. How is the community with Inertia? Is it very similar to the Rails community? A little bit different, more React focused, JavaScript focused?
I'd say it's still very small. And most people that are using Inertia seem to be using it with Laravel because Inertia started as a Laravel project. And from what I understand, it was split off into its own standalone project with adapters for additional frameworks like Django and Rails. So Inertia is kind of this high-level framework that connects back-end frameworks and front-end frameworks.
Very cool. What has been, for you, your favorite part about being back in Rails, going from Next.js, coming back to Rails, other than these, oh, cool, it turns out our page speed improved and Google's ranking us higher. Like those accidental things are great for sure. But like when it comes to actually working with your code base now, like what's been, yes, I'm so happy to be back on Rails.
I feel like it's just a combination of ActiveRecord and being able to just use my models to get the data I need for a page rather than trying to figure it out with JavaScript libraries and GraphQL. And then kind of on top of that, one of the really cool libraries we're using is OJ serializers, which is the library we're using to serialize the data that gets passed to React. There's this really neat add-on to that serializer that creates TypeScript objects for those serializers. So we're able to generate TypeScript like types for all of our serializers and then use those on the React side. Even though Ruby is obviously not a strictly typed language, we're able to strictly type when we pass things over to the client side.
That sounds very helpful if you're doing TypeScript on the front end and coming from Ruby. Okay, so as the follow-up to the what's been your favorite part about coming back to Rails, what's been your least favorite part about coming back to Rails? Listen, we all know that Rails is perfect and no one would change a thing about it. But sarcasm aside, like, it's got its rough edges. It's not perfect. For you, this is a safe space. No one's going to send you hate mail. And if they do, send them to me and I'll set them straight. But like for you personally, or for your team, especially coming from Next.js, where you might have had these nice helpers or this way of handling things, then coming back to Rails, maybe you lost it or Rails just did it differently. For you, what do you think has been a bit of a pain point? Once upon a time, a young lad named Adam was getting bullied by dinos. Heroku dinos that spent their days loitering like deadbeats while charging Adam exorbitant fees for their minimal effort. Night after night, Adam watched as his hard-earned money vanished. He was about to surrender when inspiration struck like lightning. What if he could tame these wasteful dinos with judo? And so Judo Scale was born, auto-scaling that actually works, vanquishing loitering dinos and summoning them back only when truly needed. Adam mastered his judo technique on other villains too, render services, fly machines, and even the mighty Amazon ECS tasks all fell in line. Today, developers everywhere sleep soundly, knowing their hosting bills are safe thanks to Judo Scale. Join the resistance at judoscale.com and take control of your cloud resources once and for all.
There was one part that when we moved over, I'm like, oh, I don't even know how I'm going to move this part over, because there wasn't a good Rails equivalent, which was generating our open graph images. Because we're like a social network. We want people to share everything, and we want pretty open graph images for everything that are generated based on the content of that page. So you share a list. We want them to see like the user that shared it, some of the books on that list. And in Next.js, they have kind of this really nice interface for creating these, where you just kind of write a component. You actually just return HTML and it creates a full image with it. You can pass in fonts. It's kind of like everything's encapsulated in one file. It was not the best to test, and it had its quirks with Tailwind, but it did work. I tried recreating some of that in Ruby and Rails using Grover, which is this library that I think it uses like Puppeteer or some kind of headless browser to like get a page and take a screenshot and use that. But that killed our entire server. The RAM usage of it spiked, and I had to like split that out of the main app and into its own JavaScript service. It just takes a URL from the Rails app, and then it generates an image for that URL. The creation of the content still happens on Rails, but taking a picture of that content and using it as an open graph image happens in JavaScript.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so anyone out there looking for a side project, there you go. Solve that problem in Rails. Make it easy for open graph images. So we did briefly touch on like the migration and what's been a pain point, but what kind of blockers do you have, or did you have, that you want to kind of get into? I always find the blockers question a very interesting question, because sometimes people will have a current one and it'll be interesting, or someone will say, well, we were really blocked on this for a while and here's the cool way we solved it. And this is such an interesting project because you don't hear about this very often, right? A lot more often you'll hear of someone moving away from Rails into the JavaScript ecosystem because JavaScript's eating the internet. You kind of almost did it in reverse, but you're getting a lot of benefits from it. I'm interested to hear your blockers story or stories from this.
One that probably takes a little context to go into. So one of the reasons Hardcover was initially started was because Goodreads was getting rid of their API. And I used their API to show what books I was reading on my blog. And I'm like, oh, I need a new book tracking site that has an API. So I ended up starting one. So we've been very API first since the start. And for our API, we used Hasura for it, which generates a GraphQL API from a Postgres database. And you can also have it create GraphQL endpoints that will delegate to API requests to other servers. So like our Hasura app would a lot of the time just get stuff from Postgres and return that. But if something is more like a service layer or something, or that requires a lot of different changes, it'll hit Rails. Rails will do some processing. It'll return that result to Hasura, and that'll be returned to the user of the GraphQL request. So this big Hasura piece, we've been generating API keys for it. And we kind of realized that people have started to abuse this API because we didn't really have anything in front of it. And we were using the free version, which didn't really allow much in terms of rate limiting or depth limiting. And it also like provided with a like query, like a I like for every single field in the database. I don't think we want people being able to do I like queries on book descriptions when we have 30 million books in our database, when we haven't indexed that column. So, okay, we need to do something with this API layer. So we ended up creating another Rails app. And this one is a reverse proxy to Hasura. It kind of just sits in front of it and does rate limiting, depth limiting, IP blocking, restricted API keys. If someone like pushes their key up to GitHub, we can like invalidate it. So it's kind of just this layer that sits in front of it. And that one was kind of figuring out that solution was a big problem because it happened because our servers were going down. People were hitting our database so fast and so often that I kept having to increase the size of our database every like month or two on Heroku. Okay, we just have to do something about this, and trying to figure out how to do that when it's hosted software with Asura and put something in front of that ended up being the best solution so far. But we're still kind of figuring out because it only has like one server. It's kind of just running on one DigitalOcean droplet that forwards to this GraphQL server. But so far, it's been a good solution.
Okay. You actually just prompted a thought in my head about the kind of infrastructure you have, because you've mentioned we were having to increase our Heroku database, but then you also said it runs on a droplet. What are you using to host and deploy this new Rails app?
Yeah, right now, it's pretty much all on DigitalOcean, except the production database, which is still on Heroku. And I think our Hasura API is still on Heroku and Dino's there. But those two are scheduled to be moved over eventually.
Gotcha. And how are you deploying over to DigitalOcean?
For the main app and the API reverse proxy in front of it, those are just using Kamal, which I have really, really liked. I'm not very good at DevOps. Like, to be honest, ChatGPT has been answering a lot of my DevOps questions.
Sure, yeah.
But it's gotten to the point where I can at least deploy something and not feel like it's going to fall down in 5 minutes.
Right. I'm sure it's a little more cost effective than being on Heroku was also. Just anyone who's been on Heroku knows the pain of that bill going up very quickly. So is that Kamal 1 or Kamal 2 that
Kamal
you're
2.
using? Kamal 2. Okay, so.
And actually, when we moved over and I canceled everything on Heroku, one of the services I was using was Judo Scale, which is, I think, one of your sponsors.
Yeah. Yes.
And like Adam emailed me the automatic, why did you cancel? And I'm like, oh yeah, we're moving to DigitalOcean, we're canceling. And he responded like, oh yeah, you're running Hardcover. I use Hardcover too. So
Nice.
It was like a funny moment there.
Judo Scale is a sponsor. Thank you to them for sponsoring the show, and thank you to them for their product, because at my day job, Podia, we use Judo Scale because we're on Heroku also, or still as it were. And every month we get an email from Judo Scale like, you saved $3,000+ this month. You saved $4,000. It's just like, holy crap, that's awesome that we don't A, have to manage that scale ourselves, and B, that we can kind of just set it and save that money between our downtime and uptime, because we have a lot of that depending on what our creators are doing.
On a similar note, having that on DigitalOcean with being able to scale out additional droplets for the app, that's something I still, the unknown problem for me. I don't know how we're going to do that yet.
Okay. Yeah. I can definitely see that if you're used to having Judo Scale, which just kind of does the magic for you. It's very, in a way, hand wave. You're just like, I'm on Fly, or I'm on Render, or I'm on Heroku. Help me, Obi-Wan. And it just does it for you, moving to that. I don't want to say it, but isn't that what Kubernetes is for? Like, oh no.
I think so.
Yeah. Is that something that you guys are actively working on? Or is it more of like a, hey, once it becomes a big enough issue or a big enough cost for us, we'll tackle that problem?
Yeah, I think more the later. For now, that performance side hasn't been an issue. So we probably have plenty of room there, mostly because we're relying very heavily on solid cache for like so much. Most requests have very little in terms of functionality. Most of it is able to just be provided from like a single solid cache request.
Nice. And are you also using the other solids like SolidQ?
We're still using Sidekick. I still like Sidekick.
Yeah, we use Sidekick. I'm still a fan. I just always curious when someone is using the new stuff to get their takes on it. So we'll at least stick with solid cache. How are you liking that caching strategy?
It's just kind of worked. I haven't really had to look at it. Actually, should probably check if that database is like overflowing or something. So far, it's been fine.
That's a great sales pitch, or like just, hey, it works, is a fantastic way of, hey, how good is it? Well, it just works. That's really good. Like, I like it when something can just be like, oh, out of the box, yeah, it does everything we need, or so much of what we need that we can say it just works. without naming any of the things we just talked about, sorry to make your life more difficult, what is something cool, new, or interesting that you want to share? It doesn't actually have to be coding related. You can say, hey, I just read this great book, or I just started this hobby. Those are totally answers that people have given and have been awesome answers. So I'm not making jokes. Like, you can pick whatever you want. But what is something cool, new, or interesting that you've recently discovered, learned about?
I'll kind of try to bridge that with a little tech and a little non-tech. So one of the areas I've been trying to explore more is recommendation engines, which are this huge can of worms. Whenever I see a site that does recommendations well, I'm like in awe, because a good recommendation engine takes in so many inputs. And for us, like a book site, you're taking in data about the book, the genres, the description, the lists it's on, the author, what other books that author has written, like tons of data, and trying to get a recommendation out of it. And initially, I was looking into using like TensorFlow.js and doing that on the JavaScript side. Lately, I've been kind of trying to look into doing some of that on the Python side. One of the reasons for that is, like, right now, one of the top ways that people find books on Hardcover is our trending books list, which is just a popularity list. I kind of think about it like when I was a kid, I would always get the Nintendo Power magazine, and I would look at the top 20 games in every month. I'd be like, yes, Link to the Past is still number one. And the trending list is kind of like that for books. Are the books that I am really excited about on it? Book I'm really excited about that I'm reading right now is the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, which has been really fun. Definitely recommend it. It's like RPG mixed with Hitchhiker's Guide, just really fun. I want to create a recommendation engine for us that we can use that kind of input. Oh, I liked this book. What are some books like it? Or what are some ones that are inspired by it? And getting an answer to that question has been a lot harder than I thought, but I feel like I'm still in the early days of solving it. So if anyone has any recommendations on things, especially in the Ruby world, because I feel like I'm looking outside the Ruby world for it mostly. I've looked at some things in the Ruby world, the Disco library, which does collaborative filtering. It's a really neat gem. You can like have it create recommendations for things, but it's only using a rating. It doesn't use all the other data about a book. So if anyone has any tips on that, I'd definitely be open to some research.
Yeah, sure. That book name has popped up in my news feeds or whatever. I use Android devices, so they have this Discover feed where it'll just randomly show you articles related to stuff you've probably searched about, or who knows, it's probably listening to me and I've said something dungeon crawlery. And so it was funny to hear you bring it up, and now I'm even more interested now that you've kind of floated the idea. An engine like that, would that be considered machine learning, where you're kind of taking all of this input and building recommendations, or do I not understand machine learning at all?
If I understand it, it's a miracle, but I believe so. There's so many terms throwing around in the machine learning world, and from supervised learning to unsupervised learning, and how those two structures come together to create a recommendation. And yes, as far as I know, it's still some kind of machine learning problem.
For the longest time, if you wanted to do machine learning, you weren't using Ruby. You were pretty much just using Python. But in recent years, like, there's been a bit of an explosion in gems that help out with machine learning. Like Andrew Kane has a bunch of stuff, and Landon Gray, sorry if I got your last name wrong, Landon, I'm so sorry, has been doing a lot of like AI and machine learning adjacent stuff in Ruby. And so just when you were like, oh, I thought about TensorFlow and then maybe looking in Python, but if anybody has Ruby, I will have to find the gem names that I've seen pop up recently. I have not personally used them, but pretty much anything Andrew Kane puts out is going to be a solid piece of awesomeness. So if he's got machine learning in Ruby gems, you can pretty well bet that they work awesomely. So I will get you those.
We're using his Disco library, which creates recommendations, which are the ones that are collaborative filtering just based on the rating. So yeah, if he has other ones for content filtering, that'd be amazing.
Something in my head is screaming Andrew Kane. So
he has
I don't know
so many libraries. I feel like I haven't even touched on half of them.
I've reached out, tried to get him on the show just because I'm not convinced he's a human being. Like, I am fairly certain he's a cyborg, that his entire purpose in life is just write ridiculously good gems for the public and then disappear into nothingness. Because I've never met the man, but he just puts out such high quality stuff. Instacart's very lucky to have him. Andrew, if you happen to listen to the show, please come on because I want to talk to you. You sound interesting. But Adam, you've also been an interesting guest, and the whole project is very interesting. And your blog post, which we'll link in the show notes, very clearly says part 1. Is this like an ongoing thing where you're just going to like as every step of the way? Or is there so much more that you've done already that wasn't covered in part 1 that you have part 2 coming? And how many parts do you expect to put out?
I end up writing really long blog posts and have to try to split them up.
It was great. Like there was a lot of awesome content. I almost felt a little like, man, I shouldn't have read this blog post before having you on the show. Just to be like, hey, could you just read me your blog post as a podcast episode? But yeah, a lot of good information in it.
It was shared on one of the newsletters I subscribe to, and it always has like the estimated reading time of all the other ones of like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and it gets to this one, it's like half an hour.
That's a reasonable estimation.
The other parts of the blog post that I split up, I was going to do one just on moving from cloud to the server, from Google and AWS and Heroku to DigitalOcean and Kamal. One for using Puppeteer to generate those Open Graph images in JavaScript. One for speeding up Rails with Solid Cache and Sidekick and Brick. And one for securing and speeding up our API server. So quite a few things we already talked about in this one are going to be elaborated on in that blog post.
Yeah, no, those are all great blog posts. I mean, especially some of those are not common. Just like you said with the Puppeteer one, generating that, the fact that there isn't a gem that kind of does it for you means the next time someone has to run into it, having a blog post is a great way of helping the community solve the problem, even if it isn't a gem. I refer to so many different blog posts that I've bookmarked, and I don't have to memorize this. I can refer back to this blog post or this book because there's just so much to learn and to do. So other than your blog series, almost a book's worth of blog series, what is next for you and your adventures?
We're working on open sourcing Hardcover right now. So we're bringing on some additional members to the team and just cleaning it up so that we can make it public, probably with the same GPL3 license that Mastodon and some other software as a service libraries use. That's going to be the next thing for Hardcover. And then personally, I just started a new job at Libro.fm, which is also an audiobook company. So I'm able to kind of stay doing fun stuff in the book space, which is fun.
That's awesome. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but if you have the time, what's the motivation on open sourcing Hardcover similarly to the way like Mastodon's open source? Is it just so that people can have their own instances, or do you see people using it in other ways?
Kind of the main emphasis is that this project's been running for 4 years. It has 30,000 users, 10,000 active a month. It has a user base, but we're not yet profitable. Costs are basically covering the hosting right now. So it's not like something that can provide like an income for someone working on it. So that means it's a nights and weekends project for the people that are working on it, which means it's going to be very limited just by those few people. My hope is that we've already kind of created this API. So we've kind of gotten a bunch of developers that are creating cool stuff with it already. People are creating plugins so that you can track your reading using like Kobo or like a device and have it automatically update your progress in Hardcover. So developers are already kind of working on Hardcover. This is kind of giving them a way to contribute even more, especially as I am doing the job thing and won't be able to be spending quite as much time on it.
That makes a lot of sense. That's cool. It's nice when you're able to open source something and get kind of all that extra collaboration from folks. I think that's one of the things that makes Rails so great is you have so many people able to contribute to it. It's not just a small team writing everything would slow down progress so much, but because it's open source and people have access to go in and not just report bugs, but also fix them and add features and whatnot, I think Rails becomes that much better because of it. And any project that can be open source, I think benefits greatly from a community. So that's super cool.
I'm excited about it. I've open sourced libraries, but never like an active website project. So it's going to be a new experience for me too.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, touch on, get out into public? This is a good way of like, hey, if anybody is listening and has solutions to any of the problems that you've already talked about, blockers that you have, things that are coming up, there's ways of contacting me directly through the show, and I can hook you up with Adam, or you'll at the end drop obviously ways of reaching out and contacting you. But is there anything else that you want to talk about before we get to that?
I think we've kind of covered a good broad section of stuff.
Yeah, that's been a good episode. So where can people find you, find Hardcover, reach out on the internet?
You could find Hardcover at hardcover.app. Find me at adamfortuna.com or on Blue Sky at adamfortuna.com. I'm most active on Blue Sky and Hardcover nowadays.
Very cool. I appreciate you spending time to talk about the cool things that you guys are doing. Greatly appreciate the blog post. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. And next time you are working on something cool, feel free to reach out and we'll get you back on the show. And we'll talk again about what things you're working on and what cool, new, interesting things you have to share.
Sounds good. This has been fun, Drew.
Yeah, thanks. And audience, I'll talk to you in the next one because I still don't know how to end my own show. Bye.
Bye.